Hey everybody, Attorney Somm here. Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be discussing my top 10 tips for visiting Willamette Valley. Willamette Valley, Oregon is certainly one of my favorite wine regions to visit in the United States. And if you haven't been there already, I highly recommend it. I've certainly learned a lot in the 6 or 7 times that I've been there. And so in this video, I'm going to be giving you some of the things that I learned along the way. The first thing I discovered is actually very convenient to get to. It's only about 45 minutes, potentially an hour if traffic is busy, from the Portland airport. So if you can fly directly into Portland, you should be able to get to your destination in 45 minutes to an hour or so after you get your car. And speaking of cars, while you can get a taxi to bring you all the way from the Portland airport to wine country, I definitely don't recommend that because this is not an area that's super developed in terms of tourism like Napa would be, and there's definitely not a huge supply of Uber drivers or taxis to get you from point A to point B once you get to wine country. And so you're definitely going to want to have your own transportation. My second tip for visiting Willamette Valley is to stay in a strategic location. What I suggest is staying in either Dundee or McMinnville. Those are both areas that are convenient to other wine appellations and also which have lots of outstanding restaurants. Some of those restaurants are even in your hotel or within walking distance of it. And so at night you can enjoy some extra wine at dinner if you want to without having to worry about driving back to your hotel. My third tip for visiting Willamette Valley is not to try to do too much. My suggestion would be 1 visit in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. That's probably the absolute max that I would recommend, and less than that would certainly be appropriate as well. It's definitely better to focus on quality over quantity. It's no fun if you're scrambling around trying to get from one visit to the next and you're not able to enjoy your visits. The visits take longer than you think, and it often takes longer to get from one place to another than you would expect. So it's definitely important to allow plenty of time between visits. That's especially true because Willamette Valley is very much a farming community. In addition to the grape growers, there's farmers who grow hazelnuts and other crops as well. And so it's not uncommon for you to get stuck behind a tractor that's going about 10 miles an hour on a 2-lane road and you're unable to pass. So you definitely don't want to be in that predicament where you're running late for an appointment and you're stuck behind a tractor going 10 miles an hour. One thing that will help in this regard is my fourth tip, which is to cluster your visits geographically. It's important to book your visits either in the same geographic area for the entire day or at an absolute minimum for the afternoon. In that situation, you could potentially have an appointment near your hotel and then have lunch nearby, and then after that, relocate to another area for your 2 afternoon appointments. Otherwise, I would suggest just booking the entire day in one area, especially if you haven't been there before. There's certainly plenty of good wineries in each area, and so it should be relatively easy to get 3 appointments in one particular AVA. My fifth tip is to consider the ideal length of your trip when you're planning. In my view, I think 3 full days of visits would be adequate to get a good sense for the region. You could certainly do the trip in less than that, but it could be rushed and you may not get a good feel for the different areas. Certainly the Dundee Hills is a spectacular place to visit, with lots of excellent wineries and scenery. Eola Amity Hills is definitely an upcoming region and one with lots of excellent wineries as well. And it's very different than the Dundee Hills. And so you could easily spend another day there. And that would leave you a third day to go to places like Ribbon Ridge or the Chehalem Mountains. So in my view, 3 days is an appropriate length for the trip. Tip number 6 is to utilize restaurants strategically as part of your travels. And what I mean by this is that many of these restaurants have excellent wine lists with some back vintages of many of the local producers. And so if you want to visit a particular producer, but you're not able to work a visit in, either because they don't have availability or you just ran out of time, then you could definitely prioritize that particular producer when you're perusing the wine list at the restaurant you select for dinner. Another way I like to use restaurants strategically is with respect to wineries that allow you to waive tasting fees with purchase. And so many of the restaurants in Willamette Valley allow you to bring your own wine for a corkage fee. And so one thing you could do is buy wines from the wineries when you visit, get the tasting fees waived, and then bring them to the restaurants at night and pay corkage. This is one way that you can save money on your trip and also enjoy some of the nice wines, especially if the wineries have library releases and you can get some back vintages that are drinking at peak right now. My 7th tip for visiting Willamette Valley is to enjoy sparkling wine in the morning. Certainly by day 3 of your visit, you may not want to have Pinot Noir before lunch. You're going to be getting lots of Pinot Noir probably at every single place you visit, and if you need a break from it by the end of the trip, one thing I like to do is schedule a tasting with some sparkling wine. And you could do that at Argyle, for example, and there's a couple other places as well. So certainly that's a nice easy way to start the day, especially towards the end of your trip. My next tip for visiting Willamette Valley is to plan ahead. And I would say to plan ahead even more so than when you're visiting Napa. My suggestion is at least 3 months ahead, especially if you're going to be visiting in the June to September time period, and if you're going to be there for a weekend. If you're going during the week or during the off season, it's not quite as important. But this past summer, for example, I tried to plan a trip on 2 months' notice because due to the current circumstances, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to visit before then. But what I found is when I went to book the hotel, I could only find one hotel that I was interested in that had availability on a Friday and Saturday. And so rather than relocating and changing hotels midstream, I ended up staying at a place that wasn't necessarily my first choice. So I would definitely book at least 3 months ahead, if at all possible. Another advantage to booking ahead is that it will help you cluster your appointments geographically. If you wait to book your winery visits to the last minute, it could be difficult to do that. You may have to book appointments just based on availability rather than strategically based on their geographic location. My next tip for visiting Willamette Valley is to not count on drop-in or walk-in visits to tasting rooms anymore. Unfortunately, while this is something that was available in the past, due to the pandemic and the social distancing requirements, many of the places that used to allow walk-ins now require advanced bookings. My next tip for visiting Willamette Valley is to be sure to relax and soak it all in. It's often nice to just buy a bottle or two with some friends and enjoy it, either at your Airbnb or your hotel accommodations, or even at a winery if they allow that. I know on my last visit, my friends and I were able to persuade a winery to let us use their grill after their tasting room closed. And so from 5 to 8 p.m. that day, we were able to use their grill and enjoy some wine and just admire the scenery and just soak it all in. And that was a perfect way to end the trip. And if you're interested in doing something besides wine tasting, I would also suggest visiting the Oregon coast. The Oregon coast is only about 45 minutes to an hour away, and it's also spectacular and has lots of excellent things to see there. And so perhaps if you're going to spend a week, you could spend a few days in Willamette Valley and another couple days in the Oregon coast, and maybe another 2 in Portland. And that would be a pretty good week in my opinion. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next one. I come out with weekly wine videos. Until then, drink well.